Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the TopCyberPro podcast. I'm Jim West, founder and CEO of TopCyberPro.com, and today we have a very special guest. This gentleman is the Senior Research Manager for Fujitsu Research Europe. And this man covers a lot of ground. He's got some specialties that range in cybersecurity and with multiple domains. So we can kind of consider this gentleman a multi-domain expert. And so we're excited to have Andres Murillo on the call. And I'm sorry if I got the last name pronunciation just slightly off. But Andres, tell us a little bit about yourself and then the work and research that you and your team does.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. And you're too kind. I don't know my expertise or domain in many areas, but don't worry about the last name. That was good. So yes, I'm a senior research manager for Fujitsu Research of Europe. I have a PhD on computer science from Colombia. I did my bachelor's degree also in Colombia and did my master's in Brazil, and then worked for 2.5 years as a postdoc researcher in Singapore, and then moved to work with Fujitsu since June 2023. More or less, my area has always been cybersecurity, and I think in the mostly from the point of view of it was very incidental, but it ended up being OT cybersecurity, although that wasn't the idea at the beginning, and then I ended up working on digital twins, also incidentally, I think. And now the last things that I was doing in Singapore were more also AI, the field of AI and cybersecurity, and then since Fujitsu has been all AI and cybersecurity for IT and a little bit of OT.
Wonderful. And just so folks know that I had reached out to the director of the Emerging Technologies Division for Fujitsu in Tokyo, and through conversations with him, he connected me with Andres for this podcast. So we will talk about a couple different topics, and there may be some topics that Andres cannot talk about due to confidentiality reasons, and it's not public information yet. But there's a
Mhm.
lot of exciting things that's happening with Fujitsu research, particularly in emerging technologies. And Andres' specialties are centered around more of the AI. But there was a thing you just mentioned, a little word that might have just flew over some people's heads, but I heard it. If I heard correctly, you said you did some work with digital twins. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, I mean, yes, but also there's a caveat. I can already hear comments asking what is a digital twin, because I think this is still not a fully answered question. Technically, the paper was published as a co-simulation environment, but it can or cannot be considered a digital twin depending on how do you, I think, define digital twins. But yes, it was a little bit of work on digital twins too.
Wonderful. So just so folks kind of know, a digital twin is like a digital representation of a real world asset, generally speaking, right? And so when you're starting to deal with things like AI or entities that are trying to mimic potential real world assets, this it starts to get real interesting really quick when people talk about deep fakes. And it's not necessarily the same as a deep fake, but the theory and the idea behind it is very similar, the concept. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the research and work that you're doing in AI. So let's kind of get that out the way first. So could you share a little bit about what the strategies and the goals and the things that Fujitsu Research is trying to take AI to which direction?
Yeah, I think the focus in there's multiple areas of AI, and it depends on the laboratories. So Fujitsu has beyond networking and fibers, 5 main laboratories, and I am on the data security laboratory. But there are other teams working AI from the point of view of AI. For example, AI for medical applications and other
Mhm.
types of analyzing also the core AI as an AI research topic. Data security works a little bit more of how can we apply AI, how can we protect AI.
Mhm.
So in the laboratory of data security, the this particular project or unit that we are, the work that I am doing is how we can use AI to provide better cybersecurity. How can we use AI to improve the cybersecurity capability of organizations? There's a complementary team working with us, also with Fujitsu Research of Europe, which is how can we protect AI from cybersecurity attacks. So that's at least in the data security, the two complementary approaches that we are doing. On the team on my side, on the team on the side of my team is how can AI provide security. The other team is how can we secure AI.
Mhm.
So in my particular field, the inspiration from this started actually taking a look at MITRE attack blocks
Mhm.
a couple of years. And of course, one of the main use cases of using attack is conduct what you would call either red teaming or purple teaming exercises, where
Mhm.
you have a particular actor and a particular set of threats or techniques that you're interested or organization is interested and wants to kind of evaluate what could happen with them. And I think one of the ideas that came out for us was like, oh, how can we assist or how can we use AI to kind of assist the capabilities that human operators have on that. So that's more or less the focus of what we are doing. How can we use AI agents or AI tools to evaluate the impact of novel cybersecurity threats for a particular organization, and also propose countermeasures for those cybersecurity issues. One thing that is very important, and I want to make it clear, like right at the beginning of the conversation, is I don't think, and I think it's also the vision shared on Fujitsu, that this is meant to be that AI will replace the human operators.
Yeah.
I think it's a fail. I know there's a lot of buzz and there's a lot of people that thinks that that's the path. I don't think it's the right way, and I think it will decrease the security of the organizations. I always think that what we are building here are co-tools or co-pilots or assistants for the human
Yes.
operators, so that
To
they can
augment.
focus on deeper. Yeah, augment. I don't, because I know there was a lot of buzz on all this will, and I is well, you don't know, you don't have control of what companies will do did this, but I particularly think that if the path that they follow is to reduce, for example, the number of cybersecurity analysts, we're going to see a worsening of the cybersecurity capabilities. And I think there's a mismatch between what we think in cybersecurity and what people outside of cybersecurity thinks. For me, is cybersecurity teams everywhere are overwhelmed. And a
Mhm.
lot of things that we see, it's because there's not enough people or tools or resources to address everything. So if you add AI into this, it's not to replace anyone. It's to maybe reach a level that we're like, okay, this is more acceptable, or this is a level of risk that we should be more okay with living. I do feel that in cybersecurity, sometimes we live a little bit on the edge
Mhm.
with some things that are very legacy or very outdated or very unmanaged that we're like, well, nothing worse is happening just because we are getting lucky, but it shouldn't be that way. So in
Okay.
our case, yes, we are using AI tools to improve those cybersecurity capabilities.
So could you maybe give me a specific example of where you see an AI tool protecting an organization's like network and data and its data in transit, data at rest, etc. Where would you see this, occurring and when? Because a lot of folks is like, a lot of people talk about AI solutions and they're, because it's a hot buzzword. But what do you see it and when do you see it?
I think there are two cases that I can think without entering too much details. One very good use case on live application. So I have like an offline and a live application, let's say. So in a live application, I see AI tools that can help people working on SOCs to kind of filter through the noise. And if, for example, they have some sort of infrastructure that is capturing a lot of data, but it tends to be very noisy because it's very deployed on real customers at a large scale, it can help them filter a little bit and be like, focus on this behavior that looks more attention worth, right? Like all this is noise, probably is a lot of automated tools trying to, like, for example, bang whatever, throw whatever that maybe sticks at a public IP, ignore that. Or maybe between all this noise, there's a couple of particular behaviors that maybe we have not seen or maybe is relevant. So that's one application where I can totally see AI assisting human operators on kind of
Mhm.
filter a little bit the noise. Of course, we have to be careful no, on what that filtering happens, because anytime you filter noise, there's a risk that you are creating false negatives and then you filter something that shouldn't have filtered. So
Yes.
of course, there's that caveat. Another case where I see is in reducing the effort that, for example, it takes to regenerate or replicate some artifact that allows you to evaluate how an attacker or how a threat could impact something, which is something that requires a lot of maybe manual effort on
Mhm.
getting the payload and setting up like a secure environment where you
Sandbox,
can test it,
etc.
and
Yeah.
then and yeah. And so in these are this is a more offline case. You not necessarily will be doing this, or maybe you're doing this as an incident is happening, but ideally you're doing this as after the incident has been solved or at least mitigated, and then you're doing a little bit of forensic. But I do see this a little bit more, because if you reduce the effort that it takes, you could probably do this in a more proactive way,
Mhm.
because then it becomes easy. I don't want to say trivial, but it becomes, instead of requiring say days to build this, you could maybe build it in hours. You could build it in hours. You could be a little bit more proactive on how you approach certain threats that
Okay.
a particular organization might have.
So there was an announcement recently from Fujitsu about their partnership with Riken. So Riken is a scientific institute. It's like a national scientific research institute in Japan, and they cover a lot of ground. They cover physics, chemistry, medical, biology, genomics, high performance computing. They cover a wide gamut of things in the science community. They just announced that they achieved a 256 qubit quantum supercomputer. And of course, in the same post, they mentioned that they still have a strategic roadmap to reach a 1,000 qubits quantum supercomputer. So, how do you see the emerging technology of quantum computing, and particularly quantum supercomputing, coming into our world with these constantly evolving and I guess I would say improving drastically AI systems? What do you think our world's going to look like 3 to 5 years from now when we have potentially as oh my goodness, my goodness, my brain just drew a blank. But Mr. Godot had talked about 1,000 IQ AI. What if we end up in a world where we have a potential 1,000 IQ plus AI system and having access to, let's say, 1,000 plus qubit supercomputer? What do you think that that looks like for cybersecurity?
I think it's exciting, but also we have to see, um, like for us, I think in the world of quantum computing, it's becoming all announcements about increasing capacity and increasing, and it all looks like we are in a little bit of the sci-fi field on which like we are all because you could execute multiple operations, for example, in an optimization algorithm, and machine learning training is an optimization algorithm. You could be very more efficient because there's a lot of parallelization. So immediately think exponential growth. There might be bottlenecks that we haven't discovered yet. So I think we'll see until we start seeing those bottlenecks. That I don't think is bad. It's just that when something is very new, until you get to the technical point, you're okay. This is the limitation factor. But I think it's interesting. I think it's exciting, and I think in general, probably what we will see is a different way in which we approach problems using more powerful AI capabilities. For example, uh, I have never seen a little bit ashamed about it, but I have never seen a punch card of a programming computer. I did the lowest I did ever was assembler, a little bit of assembly when I was an undergrad student, but I have no idea. If you show me a made up photo of a punch card, I'll be like, oh yeah, I believe you. And no one uses that, and that doesn't mean that we are worse programmers than the programmers back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Probably equal. They're good programmers and bad programmers. So I think in a similar way, these AI tools will probably for cybersecurity help us to build or use less, I don't want to say primitive, but closer to the machine work. So we'll be working more with frameworks and libraries and assistants that will allow you to put those things in place. And probably quantum will be a tool to fixing that. Now, something important is that just because we have more computational capabilities doesn't mean that we solve the problems that AI has,
Yeah.
right? So, for example, LLM tools are still stochastic tools. And that means sometimes they'll get the answers wrong. And it
Yes.
doesn't matter if that model is being run on an 8-bit computer or in whatever we have 5, 10 years down the road and on super computational capabilities, because the fundamentals of how it works are the same. Having more computational capability probably means that you'll fail faster, or you will have that error faster, or you'll
Yes.
have that wrong answer faster. You could brute force it, which I don't think is ideal because it will be very suboptimal. But let's say probably you could brute force it. But I see more like having a lot of computational capabilities maybe increases what type of complexity on the tools we can build, either makes them cheaper or less complex to run, or we can maybe build more powerful tools. But we have to be careful that increasing computational capabilities doesn't solve the fundamental uh, like drawbacks that these tools have or these technologies have. So
Okay.
that needs to be still an independent line of work
Yes,
of
the
work
two different
with AI.
technologies developing,
Mm.
in parallel. Here's a good question here regarding back to AI. There's a lot of talk about general AI, right? And so we hear about the generative AI, but then this is concept of general AI of what would be considered sentience, a level of sentience. Uh, do you think that AI has this capability and it's something that we'll see, let's say, in 10, 20, 30 years?
But I don't think we're near that at all. I like sci-fi a lot, but I don't think we're gonna see anything close to what in sci-fi is shown. I think we're in too primitive level for now, and that's why I keep insisting we're building assistants and we're helping to filter noise. Like AI and LLM tools are good at generating content, but you need to validate that content because
Hmm.
hallucinations would probably
Yes.
always be a problem. And we are not. This is a more philosophical question of are those LLM or AI or agent tools that we think are thinking, really thinking?
Hmm.
Are they reasoning, or are they just, I'm not saying they're useless, because I think it's useful. If you can have something that generates content quickly or can process a lot of natural language into something that you can understand, useful. They're still useful tools, but that doesn't mean that those tools are thinking, or that doesn't mean that we are reaching generalized AI. So I think we need to be a little bit conservative on that sense. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because we don't even I don't think the problem that we're trying to solve, I don't think is to build a generalized artificial intelligence. I think is, if that's the problem that we're trying to solve, we're taking a different
We're
and
going the
weird
wrong
path.
way. Yeah.
We're going the wrong way, because we're not really building. I know that with agents, we're moving closer to defining frameworks of, you can chain different agents together, and it looks like they are reasoning, but I am not so sure about how they're reasoning. Nevertheless, and this is very outside my field of expertise, but this is me completely speculating. Something that could help is the other way around. So maybe it's not we building a general artificial intelligence, but because we are now building AI models, and we are building things that we think they think, that maybe help us on how we think, and how,
Okay.
because we're building a computational uh, model that is supposed to think like a human brain, allows you to be like, wait a minute, our brains don't work that way, but they produce the same results. Why? And then we go and check, and maybe it will be AI assisting neuropsychology a little bit, like in reverse, because now you have a computational model that you use as a comparison to what this, for example, brain scan or this brain behavior looks like.
So another question now, I want to switch back to quantum, and again, and due to confidentiality or if it's something, but in quantum computing, there's a concept that's been around for a while now, but and it keeps popping up with like a lot of startups and businesses that are trying to generate buzz. So recently, I'm not going to name the company, but there was a company that put out a lot of public information about their their work with what's called neutral atoms. And I don't know how much information you have regarding neutral atoms when it comes to quantum computing, but the idea is to use, neutral atoms. Particularly, I think the most common is like a hydrogen atom. There's another atom, it's escaping me right now, but in the early reports from like 2 years ago, they were trying to use like hydrogen atoms and kind of change them in certain states that were not necessarily absolute, like near absolute zero, like with the chips, the quantum chips you see, but it's like it's slightly above zero with like microkelvins. It's a little nuanced difference, but the idea is that eventually they could achieve with low power and so forth and minimum interference. Um, what do you feel about this? Because I'm a proponent of follow the money, right? We have, Google AI, we have Quantum, Google Quantum with their Willow chip. We got Microsoft that just had a huge announcement with their quantum chip. Supposedly Amazon has got an announcement coming soon. So all these tech companies are kind of rolling out their little press releases and announcing what they got for their research and chip. And I'm sure we'll hear more probably from Fujitsu in the coming months to years. But what do you feel about a lot of businesses going around quantum chips and doing the qubit alignment with chips versus neutral atoms?
That is very outside of my area of expertise. So sorry, I don't have a lot of comments on that.
No worries.
Also, I know that we are doing quantum, but I also don't know which is the lab that is specifically working on the hardware side of quantum, because there's work being done on the hardware, but there's also
Hmm.
work being on what type of computational structures or properties these things need. So sorry, it's I know it's a little bit of a
Well, it's okay.
downturn, but it's very
Well,
outside of
well, let's
my
switch
area of
back into the
expertise.
cybersecurity. What is an exciting initiative that you and your team are working on in regards to improving cybersecurity, whether for the world, for the Fujitsu Corporation, et cetera, that you could speak about?
Um, let's see what can I speak with the confidentiality, but I think definitely what we will be. Yes, there's an interesting field, which, and I think is a very hot question. And if we are, I think that we know that we can generate code with AI with
Hmm.
dubious capabilities. Now, sometimes it works well, sometimes it works bad. But I think something that we haven't seen yet is two things. how can AI assist? Is AI assisting generating malware, generating payloads, or can we use it to generate fuzzing? There might be some work on the academia on the state of the art that I haven't read, maybe, but that's one of the fields. Another interesting topic that I don't know how much has it been explored is what is the impact of having a bunch of AI tools generating code? How is it going to look? Are we going to change the profile that code looks? And will that generate a different landscape in terms of vulnerabilities where you can like trace back analyzing the data set and the model that was generated to what I'm trying to say is could you take a look at, for example, analyze the data set and the model that was used to generate this particular code, and then you can predict because this data set and this model were used, probably the bad practices of this false software are this list. So if I had to look vulnerabilities on this code, I'm going to start looking for this. Because
Okay.
at the end of the day, a lot of malware is introduced because we as humans follow poor or non-hygienic software development practices, right?
Hmm.
But it's millions of humans working at the same time. So it's like a million of dots generating a few lines of code. But now you're even reducing the space where you don't have millions of humans generating code, but millions of humans using 20 tools as co-pilots. So is that generating a more like homogeneous space in terms of searching for malware or searching for practices? And I think this is not something that we're directly looking at, but it might be something relevant in upcoming years of has it changed the landscape of like software analysis for malware or for bad practices? Has AI impacted that? And we are in that age where we're not a decade because I don't think a decade ago we were using AI to look at that. So we're
Yeah.
in the middle point, we're in the rising point where these tools are starting to be developed. And it might be interesting to start gathering data to maybe 5, 6 years down the road, we can go look back and say, look, this is the impact in terms of software analysis that using AI tools generated for us.
Okay. So from your research and things that you monitor and you see out in the world and in the cybersecurity realm, what are some of the, I guess, we got AI, but what are some of the emerging threats? If you had to say, hey, these are the top one, two things that I've seen that have been generated by AI, or these are the attack vectors that either cyber criminals, nation states, or just organizations out there doing malicious things, or how are they leveraging AI that you've seen in your research?
Yeah, I think the making tools faster to deploy massively is definitely something that AI is assisting cyber threat actors to the same way that some people can use copilots to generate code, some people can use copilots to help generate some basic tools to test stuff. And I also think that one of the biggest things or threats that we're always going to face is phishing and
Mm.
social engineering attacks. And I'm a little bit terrified but what can be done by deepfakes and other sort of this is that line that intersects cybersecurity but also social type of attacks. So we're seeing a massive spike on the type of scams because they can just imitate your voice and make the phone call of I'm in an accident or whatever and then get a scam. But I also think that that will be leveraged by cyber threat actors, especially in fields of either IT but OT cybersecurity, where you can have the classical type of attack of I need my password reset because I lost my phone or whatever, and then I call IT and it's super critical, and then in reality it's not me, it's a deep fake voice generating that, and that's like the first way I gain access to some sort of credentials, and then from there I start doing lateral movement. So definitely that field of um, exploring the AI tools in the side of like fake news or deep fakes or scamming or phishing attempts is very, I think, worrisome from that perspective that I'm seeing.
So when it comes to things like, oh, you mentioned that you have a good some experience with IT OT networks, but when it comes to like ICS, SCADA, and these other control systems, there's been a lot of concerns with like power outages. There's been some power outages in Europe. There's been some in Central South America, and now there's a lot of rumors that the U.S. is going to be the target next. That these were just test, practice runs before that we might experience some outages in America. What do you think that the capability of hacker groups and organized crime slash nation states has in regards to leveraging the power of AI to help them develop these payloads that can attack SCADA, ICS, and OT networks to infiltrate them as well as to compromise them or cause, denial of service potentially?
I think we haven't. It's difficult to establish if they are using AI for that because they're not gonna say how they
Yeah.
managed to do it. But I think it could be possible that some sort of automation is being used are at analyzing at least for the first access of just probing massively what you're trying to do, and there might be some AI tools helping them uh, filter the results of that initial probes of identifying critical targets and assets. In the case of OT, cybersecurity, and ICS, I think what scares me always the most is it's very difficult to protect the systems because there's a lot of legacy and there's a lot
Hmm.
of very long-term deployment of servers, and some of them are remote access. And I think what also is scary is that you don't know, you don't, it's very, you could have a clean slate on an IT infrastructure, very costly and in some devices, but some of these, the equipment that has been deployed there and is meant to last forever, the costs are significantly higher. So you never know what might be going around on that area. Yeah, and in terms of AI, for example, leveraging for this, I know there was a lot of work that we did on AI before I joined Fujitsu, for example, on intrusion detection systems that either use AI to analyze the SCADA data and the network data. So you, for example, identify the network data, process the network data first or the physical data, and then when you detect an anomaly, you go back to the network data and kind of correlate if those two things are generated. And I do think you could have the same in an opposite way, where you have AI tools, but in this case, analyzing the sensor data so that you can have smarter attacks. So if you compromise a set of sensors, how can you alter the readings reported to the SCADA server so that you may take the state to an unsafe state without triggering the IDS? And I totally see AI probably being used not on the generation of payload or code, but in the processing or the analyzing of the data that you have maybe collected from the actuators. So you have a system where you have been eavesdropping the state of the sensors, and now what you want to do is, can I move the sensors from a safe, can I move the system from a safe state to an unsafe state, doing like a stealth kind of attack where I slowly manipulate the sensors without triggering the
Hmm.
countermeasure systems that I see. So in ICS, maybe less on the software payload size of it, because I don't think there's a lot of data on
Yeah.
that. If you're trying to generate code for IT systems, there's a very big repository of data. But if you're going to try to generate payloads or something like that for ICS, there's very little data. A lot of the protocols are not public, they're proprietary, so they're not public available. If you search Stack Overflow for a particular IT system, you're going to get millions of pages, but for, I don't know, Matbus, it's going to be very, very small. But on the analysis of the sensor data, it might be possible that you have some actors trying to, okay, we want to take the system to an unsafe state. We want to do it without being detected, or we want to do it at a specific moment where we know it will have the highest impact. So, for example, if I'm going to cause interruption of the water service, it's like an optimization problem. At what moment could I cause either the highest economical, social, or political impact? And that's kind of problems that AI might assist the actors in this.
In regards to water system would be Monday morning when everybody's waking up, getting showered for work.
Probably, or like, yeah, or you could, for example, um this is a field, it's again a little bit away from my field of experience, but with climate change you have some cities that depend on
Oh yeah.
rain and reservoirs being filled at a particular time, and then when there's rainy seasons you fill up those reservoirs to later use them. So there is a potential change of try to evaluate climate conditions and decide in this
Wow,
week we're going to
there it
launch
is.
the
There's so
interruption. It
much
has an
data and
impact.
context to look
uh,
at. So yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that the context relate using AI to relate multiple areas of context to mix and to have the highest impact on the cyber attack is a field where I definitely see the use of AI.
wow, that's interesting. Um, I'd like to kind of take a moment of levity in the podcast where we kind of just we've been talking a lot of technical stuff. So I just want to throw some rapid fire questions at you just for fun. There's no right or wrong answer. So whatever answer comes to your mind first, okay? All right, so let's start
Yes, let's
off with
go.
this one. This one splits the room. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars. I haven't watched almost nothing of Star Trek, to be honest.
No,
I
no,
feel
no.
ashamed, but Star
Okay.
Wars.
Who's your favorite character in Star Wars?
Oh, good question. I think Ahsoka. Ahsoka Tano definitely.
Okay. Cake or pie?
Ah, cake. Sweeter,
What
I
kind
think.
what kind of cake?
What kind of cake? Oh God, I now don't know because I think the differences are very mild. Is a tiramisu a cake or a pie? It's
Say
a
again?
dessert. Is a tiramisu a cake or a
Tiramisu?
pie?
I think it's a cake. It's more square. So
If if tiramisu is a cake, then a cake. If tiramisu is a
then
pie,
a
then a
cake.
pie.
Okay. What has been your most favorite book of all time that you've read, and what is the last book that you've read?
All right, favorite book of all time that I read is Anathem. Anathem by Neil Stephenson. I think it's a very interesting sci-fi book with a completely wild concept of there's different cosmos and these different cosmos have a different structure and there's yeah, it's a very I don't want to oh sorry I throw a major spoiler alert on that. So spoiler alert if you could put it before the thing. But Anathem is a very good speculative sci-fi book by Neil Stephenson. Latest book that I read I don't remember the latest. I don't remember what I was reading before the current book that I'm reading. Sorry for that. But the latest book that I'm reading now is 9/11 and by Ackerman and how the threat terror generated Donald Trump, which is a little bit away from sci-fi. Oh yeah, I remember. Latest book was one of the expense one, but I don't remember which one was the latest that I read.
No
But yeah,
worries.
sorry.
Well, if you could give me the links to those publications, I'll make sure they're in the description below so that people watching this right now, you don't have to Google it. It's in the description below. Now I
Got it.
want to jump back into, this is my favorite question to ask my guests, is that if we jumped into a time machine and went back to a younger version of yourself on the day one that you decided you wanted to, study cyber and you wanted to study AI, well,
Mm.
maybe not AI at the time, but that you made the decision that you wanted to get into security. What was that story like, and can you share it with us?
I have can I share two? I don't know about the security, but I know the moment where I wanted to be in networking.
Hmm.
Which is I think that eventually led to everything else. So when I started electronical engineering, I thought I was going to be on control theory. And then there was a very simple telecommunications lab or test where we just transmitted. This was a very analog. This is very primitive, but we transmitted a byte or something wirelessly. I mean, not a byte, a bit. We just sent some information wirelessly. And that for me was magical. And still today, I think all wireless communications is just like dark magic. And I know I shouldn't say this with so many years, but for me, the fact that we can receive information wireless I know the physical concepts, but for me, it's still amazing. This moment that I'm telling you must have happened 20 years ago, maybe, and for me, still. So that was the moment where I was like, okay, definitely telecommunications and networking is a very interesting topic for me because it was like a little bit wow. Then I started working on wireless sensor networks on 2008, and that eventually led to cybersecurity. So it was a little bit from that moment where I like, wow, wireless communications are like magic to cybersecurity is like a straight path that you search.
Well, if you think wireless communications was magic, imagine in the next, definitely I think less than a decade, the next and possibly the last major advancement for telecommunications will be entanglement from quantum
Yeah,
computing, where you have the entangled qubits that will mirror their behavior
yeah,
no matter how far apart they are, because that will truly bring us instant communication and
yeah,
instant data relay transfer, which again for telecommunications is going to be to me the last frontier, if you will, where when we talk to like satellites, like imagine like when we send a satellite like the Voyager 1 and it takes like so many months for a signal to go there and then the signal to come back. With entanglement, we'll be able to talk to these things instantly. We'll be able to communicate with Mars instantly. All of these things, the distances won't matter as much anymore when it comes to communication. So I think that's going to be mind blowing once we're able to truly harness entanglement for telecommunications. So I think that that's still a future to be determined and realized, but I think that's the path that entanglement can truly give us in telecom. Um, Another question I like to ask my guests is that along your journey of your career, I'm sure there's been people that have inspired you, mentors, leaders, managers, and so the question I'm asking is there any names that you, what I like to use the term is shine a light on because of the impact they've had on you and your career? And again, this could be managers, leaders, executives, or just other people, experts in industry that said, "Hey, I was inspired by this person." You mentioned wireless, but was there people along the way that kind of motivated you?
yeah, definitely. I think definitely the first one that comes to my mind was my first boss, and I started an academic career. Basically, my hometown is very small, and I couldn't find a job on engineering. And then there was a research project, and they told me, these wireless sensor that I have worked is wireless sensor networks. Want to work on that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And then one of these days, this boss told me, "You need to start a master's, or I'll fire you next year." that was a wild thing for him to say. He was right though. At the moment, I was shocked because it's like I'm clinging into this work because I couldn't find anything else, and you're literally telling me you need to do a master's or I'll fire you. And he was right because he was telling me you're not gonna advance on your career unless you do a master's. I don't think you need now looking back. I don't think you need a master's or a PhD to be a researcher. You just need to be curious and to be perseverant because
Mhm.
it's a lot about patience more than being smart. But at the moment, that set me on that path, and I think that changed definitely. So I definitely the name of this guy is Diego Martinez. He's a professor in Cali, in Universidad Autónoma, and so that was one of the cases. The second, I think, huge mentor that I have. So it's like at each of my academic stages is Otto Duarte. He's a very he was a very famous professor in Brazil. He mentored when he was my advisor, he was 60 years old and he had like 30 plus 5 years of academic experience. So he mentored a generation of
Wow.
academics in Brazil, and he had a very personal way of advising people. And I still use a lot of his tips. Some of them are like very interesting tips on academia, but I think he had so much passion for this that it kind of put me like, oh, this looks like a cool thing to do, to having this type of high level academic discussions. And also my PhD supervisor, which is one of the kindest supervisors that I had. And I know for some PhD students, they have horrible stories about supervisors. So I was very lucky to have very kind supervisors. So my main supervisor is a professor named Sandra Rueda, and her field of experience of work is mostly policy violations and software defined networking. But she was very kind, and I think that helped me because there are a lot of horror stories for PhD
Yes.
students, and when I have friends or colleagues that are going for a PhD, I immediately kind of want to shuttle them and be like, you need to have a hobby, you need to take care of yourself because it can be rough. So I was lucky and on that sense. And the professor Alvaro Cardenas, which is what got me formally started on ICS, and I think this helped my career. And I think lastly was my postdoc supervisor, which is Stefano Galelli. He's a professor now and Cornell, and I think he was very kind too and very smart. And I think he helped me hone a little bit of my research skills, particularly in academic writing. I still write very poorly, I would say, but I think he helped me a lot on that.
Awesome.
And Fujitsu, Sekiya Motoyoshi and Uno Yuki are like two of my bosses, and I like them because they are very smart, but at the same time very humble and open to collaborate. So I think I've been lucky working with all of these people through my career.
Well, thank you for shining a light on all these names because, we're all the sum of all the people in our lives, right? Both our teachers, our professors, mentors, bosses, other people, experts that we admire. Even our family is part of the fabric of who we are, right? In our DNA. So, thank you for sharing that. That's also one of my favorite questions in the podcast. Um, the a lot of times, a lot of folks and professionals, they try to make time, aside from their day jobs, to do things like volunteer work or donate or contribute hours or money or their time into nonprofit work, charities and volunteer work. Is there anything that you do, and even if you don't, actively participate, is if there's just a charity or a volunteer or nonprofit that's near and dear to your heart that you would like to shine a light on?
I sadly don't do that anymore, but I used to do it. I think I had more energy when I was an undergrad student. When I was an undergrad student, I worked for many years with an organization named Techo. This is an organization that is present in Latin America, and they build houses for homeless people. They have a full scheme of intervention. And I worked maybe for 8 or 9 years with them, and it was wonderful doing that type of volunteer work. I think now, I don't know why I do less. I think you become,
Life
I
gets in
don't
the
know,
way.
life gets in the way, I guess. But when I was an undergrad, that was definitely one of the experiences that
Is
helped
that
me a lot.
organization still active today?
Yes. I was looking, and I will send you the, the
Yes,
the
please.
link.
So
But
please send me their website and links and socials, and I'll include them in the description below. So if anyone out there wants to check them out and support them and the great work that they do, this is what it's about. The question just kind of inspires us to take a look at something and an organization just doing good in the world. So I love that. Um, so let's switch back to the technical stuff again. And so, what's next for you and your team and the work
yep.
that you're doing? Can you kind of share what's on the roadmap, if you will, of what you're allowed to talk about? But what does the next 6 months, year, 3 years look like in the roadmap for you and your research with your team?
Yes. So now one of the strategies that we are doing is moving into agentic AI, and how can we generate this? How can we make more powerful of these type of tools. And for now, the focus on us is still on how can we reduce the time that it can take an organization to evaluate the impact of a threat. So the current status, and this is not because things are being hard, it's just because things are difficult, is that it takes weeks or months from some organizations from the moment that a vulnerability gets reported to a moment that you have a countermeasure applied to that. And the focus of our team and the other teams around the world on AI and cybersecurity is, can we reduce that time? Can we have something when the moment a vulnerability gets reported, an organization can quickly develop all that is needed to evaluate, for my network, this is the impact, this is how it would look. We know that there are tools that do that, but the tools tend to be more passive. So you have the vulnerability, which reports a list of software or that it's impacted, and then you have an inventory of software, and then you just kind of match, okay, it could be, but you don't actually run immediately or automatically a test that tells you, oh, this would be the impact of that. So I think that's the first goal, and the next goal is, okay, can we take that to a more obscure level when before you have these vulnerabilities reported on official sources, you start testing them and developing stuff like that. So in this, it will require monitoring either Twitter threads or some sort of social media or security blogs, or you're starting to see some behavior and you're trying like, okay, how could, if that were to happen, first of all, does that affect us? And if it does, how would it affect us before these vulnerabilities get reported into the field? So that's more or less, without many details, the
Yeah.
field and the work that we are doing. Initially, at least in our team, we were looking on IT cybersecurity, but I think in the case of uh, the looking down the road, we also want to look into OT cybersecurity.
Awesome. Well, do you have any like blogs, websites outside of just your LinkedIn that people can follow you on or any socials?
I'm only using LinkedIn, and I think I
LinkedIn.
never started a project of starting a
No
blog
worries.
for us.
So,
There is
so
a
if you
tech
don't,
blog for Fujitsu, but I
uh-huh.
think it's a more general. I'll pass you the link of the
Yes.
of the tech blog, but it's
So,
not only
folks,
me. It's
check out the links that Andres is going to share with me. They'll be all in the description below. Andres, this is the moment where I like to give my guests the final word. So, in regards to your expertise and any advice or guidance, or if just someone watching this episode wants to say, "Hey, I want to learn more about cybersecurity and AI," where would you direct them to? And you have the final word.
I think so the first thing, and it's something that I learned at Fujitsu, and I'm glad that I learned at Fujitsu, is that there's a lot of gatekeeping on research and cybersecurity and AI. I think we're getting better there, and I think that we need to start moving those barriers away. For example, before joining Fujitsu, I used to think that for you to be a successful researcher, you had to have a PhD. And then in Fujitsu, I have met wonderful researchers which are way better than me, and they don't have a PhD.
Mhm.
And so that's the first thing. Like, you don't need the diploma or the title. The title and the diploma is a credential, and as a credential, it can like should should inform some properties, but it's not the only path. I think this is a message for people, but also for organizations to kind of evaluate a little bit differently candidates for that. And if I had an advice of how to learn about cybersecurity, I think the way of learning cybersecurity and AI is tinkering, or at least for me, it was a little bit of tinkering. There's a lot of information there, but now I think it's very easy to find some sort of GitHub tool that allows you
Mhm.
to quickly download something and start testing. For networking, the most bare bone, cheapest tool to run will always be Mininet, which is
Mhm.
like, I think 15 years old if we're talking about like age of Mininet. But Mininet is a very quick and easy uh, a network that allows you to do. It looks simplistic, but if you start digging inside, you're gonna find concepts. And look, Mininet was containers before containers
Mhm.
were sexy. So if you
Yep.
understand Mininets, you understand containers. If you understand containers, you're one step ahead, just one step before understanding like network function virtualization and other stuff like that. And Mininet runs on SDN, which is also a very popular thing. So that's in the networking side. In terms of tool for cybersecurity, I think one of the most powerful to get started onto integrating a lot of things is going to be Caldera, developed by Mitre Corporation. Caldera is a very powerful tool, and if I were teaching a cybersecurity class at uni now, I'll probably start with either combining Mininet with Caldera, just to get the students started into something that allows you to quickly test the stuff. You can have 2 hours of slides, and that's important at some point. But I think also tinkering. Okay, try it.
Yes.
What does this technique think? What does this tactic means? What this payload affects that? Then that with that tinkering, you could like engage a little bit better the students or people starting in the cybersecurity field. I also feel it's exciting times because maybe because I'm in the field, but it has become more popular. And now the fun thing about cybersecurity, I think fun and terrifying thing about cybersecurity is that you could be studying something and then on the next day there is a very worrisome news that is okay, this could happen. Oh, we're studying, I don't know, Modbus, and then tomorrow you're oh, this water plant or this electricity plant maybe was hacked by that protocol that you were studying before there was a vulnerability or an unencrypted traffic. So I think are exciting and scary times at the same time for that.
Wonderful. Well, Andres, thank you so much for your time. I know it's very valuable, and the work that you're doing is tremendous, not only for Fujitsu, but for the world. Because, Fujitsu is one of those top companies that have always been on the forefront of technology. And so thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jim.